Hey, good morning again. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get started in about 30 seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining this Washington Transportation Plan Connecting Communities workshop. My name is John Overman, the consultant project team. I'm joined by Paula Reeves, who is with the Washington State Transportation Commission staff, the client for this project and leading the Washington Transportation Plan. So welcome, Paula. Do you want to kick us off with a few words?
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, I get the pleasure of introducing the Transportation Commission to you all for those of you not familiar. And thank you again for being here today and giving your time and input. So the Transportation Commission for Washington State is an independent 7-member body with each member appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. We have 3 commissioners from east of the mountains and 4 from west. And also the DOT secretary, Washington State Department of Transportation secretary, and the governor's office representative serve as non-voting members of the commission. I'll just briefly talk to you about their roles. Next slide, please. The commission has a broad range of roles. They propose transportation and finance recommendations to the governor and the legislature. They serve as the state tolling authority, adopting state highway and bridge tolls and setting ferry fares, Washington State ferry fares. They provide a public forum for transportation policy development, which I think is most important. They hold 11 meetings a year across the state and take public input. They conduct special legislatively directed projects and studies. And they author the Washington's 20-year statewide transportation plan known as WTP, or Washington Transportation Plan, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Next slide. I'll just quickly go over the agenda. We will do a brief welcome and give you a little background on Washington Transportation Plan, and then we'll go into some polling. These meetings are very interactive, so we just don't do a whole lot of talking. We mostly spend the time asking you for your feedback on challenges, gaps, and solutions. And then we'll wrap it up with a little bit about what we're doing next. So thank you again for your time and attendance. Really looking forward to this. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jonathan for the background.
Thank you, Paula. So I will go over an overview of the Washington Transportation Plan, as well as some of the challenges that we've heard from previous meetings and engagements. So I will talk at you for a few minutes. We also have a couple guest speakers to share their perspective, just to kind of kick off that gaps and solutions part of the discussion. So, you know, for those of you who may be new to Zoom, I imagine not many of you, but you can rename your chat yourself by clicking on participants. You can click the 3 dots and hover over that and rename yourself, add your agency. We do have Q&A and chat open for the meeting today. So, you know, if you have reactions to something that someone said or put in the poll, you know, you can use the chat. Q&A, you may not see it on your screen. So if you click on the 3 dots, you can find the Q&A box and ask questions about, you know, the process. If you want one of our project staff to answer a question about the plan itself. And again, raising hand, either you'll see that on your screen or you may have to click the 3 dots to see that as well, to mute, unmute during the verbal discussion. So we mentioned Mentimeter. We're going to be using this tool throughout the call today. So there's going to be a single code and a single site that you can go to. So if you type in menti.com on your smartphone or a browser and enter this code 7690-7372. We have a couple questions just to kind of warm up before we get into it. So go ahead and do that now. I'll also copy the direct link into the chat. And you should be able to just click on that link as well. So head on over there and answer this first pop quiz. So how much did traffic fatalities in Washington State increase between 2020 and 2023? Again, these are in percentages, but even though the numbers on your quiz will just show numbers. So is it 12%, 21%, 33%, or 44% or 41%, excuse me? Okay, another 10 seconds.
I'll just mention that these polling questions are anonymous, so feel free to provide your input. We value it very much.
Thanks, Paul. All right, so you can see the live results on your screen. I'll refresh this slide, and about 9 of you got the correct answer, 41%. I should have the numbers in front of me, but it's about 570 to about 810 in terms of increase in fatalities. And I'll show you another slide later on in the deck that highlights that. So a big increase in traffic fatalities in the last 4 years. Another quick question before we get into it. So please tell us your affiliation. Are you a member of the public agency, either local, regional, or state? Are you here from the private sector, a consulting firm? Are you a nonprofit or academia, or someone from the general public? So that you should have the same code. So you should just be able to see the next question in the Menti poll. All right, so right now we've got the majority of you from a local public agency, and a good chunk of you from other public agencies as well, a few others from other agencies. So good group, good spread today. All right, so I'm going to get into the overview. Just real quickly to kind of set the stage. Paula covered a bit on the Washington Transportation Plan, but I wanted to highlight, this being really drive home the point that this is a statewide plan for all modes and all jurisdictions. So the umbrella here is meant to show the coverage, not necessarily the, importance or size of this effort. It's really to show that this is building on a lot of the other efforts that you at local cities, you at regional agencies, you at state agencies are working on, to kind of fold into this overall vision for this 20-year vision for transportation in Washington State. So it is a policy plan. We're not going to be talking about specific projects. We will talk about specific strategies and recommendations, but really recommended strategies. It is one of the plans that helps meet the federal and state requirements for having a statewide transportation plan. It's a great avenue for public engagement and stakeholder engagement. So we'll be doing more public engagement in 2025. And then it's an opportunity for us to coordinate across jurisdictions, across the state. There are 6 statutorily defined goals in Washington State. These are the backbone of the Washington Transportation Plan. They're economic vitality, so ensuring that the transportation system promotes the prosperous economy. Preservation, really focused on extending the life of our assets. Safety, both in terms of security and safety, so roadway safety and personal security. Mobility, both for goods and people. Environment and health, focusing on quality of life in the natural environment. And finally, stewardship, making sure that we're good stewards of public resources, that the system is maintained efficiently. Preservation and safety are the 2 goals that have been identified as the highest priorities for the legislature. So this is the kind of backbone for the Washington Transportation Plan. And these have been in statute since the year 2000. And so, as I'm sure you're aware, there are a lot of new initiatives, new policies that have been passed in recent years. And the last Washington Transportation Plan was 2018, before the pandemic. So it's been 6 years since that, and we've got significant efforts around climate with the Climate Commitment Act and VMT target setting and changes to the Growth Management Act. We have new conversations or emerging conversations around long-term funding with road usage charge and other avenues. We've got safety challenges, which we'll talk about today, and complete streets initiatives. We have new transportation funding with Move Ahead Washington, but certainly not enough to cover all of the great needs that we have. So we developed some draft policy pillars really to help connect those goals to the goals that I mentioned in the last slide to these new and emerging priorities. And these workshops that we're holding right now are focused on these policy pillars. So we've held 2 already on sustainable or long-term funding and climate and resiliency. And you can go to the website and click and view those sessions. If I don't think sustainable funding has been posted yet, but climate and resiliency is already on the website. And then we'll talk about equity next week. So connecting communities, this definition here is just to kind of open up the conversation. It is not a final definition, but transportation investments reconnect communities, close gaps in the network, improve access to opportunity, and improve quality of life. And when we released, or when we talked about these pillars in our regional meetings a few months back, really safety kept coming up. Where is safety on this list? And so I think that'll be a big piece of the conversation today. So again, these policy pillars are meant to be kind of an additional layer to add to the goals and really help to connect those goals and the strategies that we develop to the statewide priorities and the local planning priorities. So where we are in terms of the overall schedule, we are midway through 2024. We're wrapping up the phase 1 of the outreach, and so we held 6 regional meetings in April and May, really to understand what are some of the challenges and opportunities facing the state. We're getting into developing recommendations or recommended strategies. And these regional sessions or these topic sessions are kind of the bridge between those, taking what we heard in the regional meetings and trying to understand what's working well, where the most progress needs to be made, and what are some of those potential solutions to address the challenges. So today's conversation will focus on that. And just before we get into the main part of the conversation, I have a few slides just to set the stage. Just kind of highlighting what we've heard in some of the regional sessions. So before we do that, I know connecting communities, it can be kind of a nebulous term, and it definitely, brought out a lot of different ideas in our regional sessions. So thought we'd ask this question: what are 1 or 2 words that come to mind when you hear connecting communities in the context of transportation planning? And you can answer this question multiple times if you have more than 2 words. This is great. So a lot on, removing barriers, increasing access, historical, healing communities, multimodal, removing barriers. Great. So keep them coming. I'll share another slide, but you can keep adding to that word cloud. So what we heard from the listening sessions back in April, May, these are the high level, most of the challenges and opportunities kind of distilled into a couple buckets. And a lot of these that I've bolded do relate to connecting communities because it is a broad term that can encapsulate a lot of different things. We heard from folks who talked about failing infrastructure and maintaining connectivity where there are few routes. So if you have a rural community that has aging infrastructure that has one key bridge and it's failing, that's a huge accessibility issue, potential accessibility issue. Affordability with people getting pushed out of urban areas or due to rising home costs, jobs, housing balance, and sort of the mismatch there, growth in certain areas. safety challenges. So some of these big challenges, cross border, right? A lot of the population centers in Washington State are on the border of either Oregon, Idaho, or British Columbia. Again, opportunities, there's a lot around opportunities that could help improve access, close gaps. And so there's a lot to be done, but there's a lot of interest and energy around multimodal strategies, demographic shifts with younger generations being maybe more likely to switch to other modes. There's a lot of co-benefits of solving a safety and a connectivity problem. Land use and densification can solve multiple challenges as well. So just a couple high-level charts to kind of highlight some of these points. I mentioned safety. This is the traffic fatalities over the last 50 years. You could see it sort of generally trending down to kind of historic lows around 2011, 12, 13, and then this increase again. Even with the pandemic, or maybe because of the pandemic, right? These fatalities are on the rise again. These are total traffic fatalities, and really active transportation fatalities. People walking and biking have borne the greatest burden of those increases in the last few years. So a 33% increase versus a 21% increase in those two time periods I've highlighted at the bottom. Our system is designed for driving, and commute mode share is just a small slice of the overall trip making. But you can see that drive alone for commute in 2019 versus 2022, there has been a decrease, right? Largely because of the increase in work from home. But really, work from home, the pandemic took a large chunk out of drive alone, but the bigger hit is on public transportation, where you have almost half the number of people commuting to work via public transportation. So a huge percent decrease. But this is just to kind of highlight that we want more multimodal options. Obviously, it doesn't work in every area and every community. And I just wanted to note that we don't have a household travel survey in Washington State, but at a national level, the percentage of commute walk trips is about half of the all trips. So we have 3% here, but it's likely much higher than that in terms of overall mode share. One more slide to kind of highlight some of those challenges. The chart here shows total VMT on the bars and per capita VMT on the line, and there's two different axes. So per capita VMT, over the last decade and a half was decreasing or at least maintaining steady. There's obviously the dip during the pandemic, but at the same time, population is increasing, so total VMT keeps going up, and is still lower now than it was a few years ago. But we'll see what happens over the next few years if it rebounds to pre-pandemic levels. We do have a lot of transit agencies in the state, 32 of them, and they offer a lot of great service, but it doesn't work for everyone. The 20 largest agencies had about 930 million passenger miles traveled in 2023 versus 58 billion BMT roughly around the same time. So these are order of magnitudes difference in terms of transit versus driving. So again, these are statewide. Every community is very different. These are statewide trends, but just wanted to offer a few facts before we got into the discussion. So we're going to turn over to the heart of the conversation today. I have one more slide, and then I'm going to turn it over to some of our guest speakers. We've invited a few people just to share perspective on their agency, where they see progress is being made, what they're up to in terms of this important topic of connecting communities. I did want to note that the previous WTP that we are building on does have some strategies related to accessibility, integrating land use, obviously safety, and we're looking at those as well to update as we get into the recommendations this fall. There's a lot going on the state. We've done a little bit of research, but we're really interested in hearing from you all about what's working in terms of creating plans, policies, projects related to connecting communities. So with that, I'll stop talking. We have several folks to give a few-minute overview of their agency, their perspective, some of those questions that I mentioned. We'll start with the Intertwine Alliance, and then WashDOT, and then Seattle Department of Transportation. So Tara Wilkinson as the co-director of Intertwine Alliance. Yeah, you want to share your thoughts on the topic before we get into the group discussion?
Sure, thank you very much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So the Intertwine Alliance we're the Portland, Oregon, Vancouver, Washington region's nature coalition. We're 80 public, private, and nonprofit partners advocating for investments in parks, trails, green space, and equitable access to nature. I'll put a link to our website in chat when I'm done talking if you want to check us out a little more. While our focus is parks and trails, we collaborate with our fellow regional coalitions who are focused on transportation and affordable housing, because trails and multimodal off-street paths, the main type of transportation we are focused on, cross the boundaries of all three issues and are so important for community connectivity. Being a regional nature coalition, we try to think in terms of watersheds and wildlife corridors, which is why Clark County, Washington is within the Intertwine Alliance boundaries. Also, Portland and Clark County are obviously one big metropolitan community. So in many ways, so that also makes sense. But in terms of political context, Oregon and Washington are very different. Just want to acknowledge that the vast bulk of Intertwine Alliance's policy work is in Oregon. We also we convene and manage a regional trails advocacy group with robust membership from both sides of the river, in which local jurisdictions and nonprofit trails advocates are coming together to tackle how we close the gaps in our regional trails network, thinking past jurisdictional lines to that connectivity piece. If you haven't heard, the big item for the 2025 Oregon State Legislative Session is going to be a transportation funding package, and looks like we'll be following in y'all's footsteps on that, surely looking to lessons learned. Oregon's transportation funding is in a bad state and desperately needs some fixes. So the Intertwine Alliance has joined with a bunch of transportation justice advocates in what we're calling the Move Oregon Forward campaign. And we're looking for a funding package that is safety forward, climate forward, provides fair funding, and builds in more government accountability. Things that I'm happy to see that are also pillars of y'all's work. So again, the Intertwine Alliance's priority in this broader transportation landscape is trails and bike-ped off-street paths. They are essential for connecting communities in so many ways, and they tend to get lost in the larger transportation policy conversation if we don't keep elevating them. So just to finish up, here are a couple questions I'd love to ask you to keep forefront in your minds when thinking through priorities for updating the plan. How are off-street paths integrated into statewide safety and mobility strategies? Often, off-street paths can provide the safest, most comfortable connection between communities or between destinations within a community. And they often are the community preferred alternative. So we think they should be a standalone strategy or consistently included in plan language around bike and ped safety, safe routes to school, and transportation options. Also, how can the plan integrate green infrastructure investments as part of its climate mitigation strategy? How much can you build in incentives for tree canopy and greenway investments? That, those are hot topics here, I'm sure there too. So I think with that, I am at time, and I'm really sorry that I can't stick around and learn from you all. Well, actually I can for a little while. I have a meeting at 11. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Tara. I just wanted to thank you for being part of this discussion. I think the Intertwine just presents such an immense opportunity for connecting communities. And we've seen this play out in Atlanta with the Atlanta Beltline and the economic vitality and safety improvements that's created. So consider Washington your partner, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. And that's a good segue to our next guest from WashDOT. Barb Chamberlain's the Division Director of the Active Transportation Division with Washington State Department of Transportation. So Barb, take it away.
All right, and what Tara said about separated infrastructure being especially valuable. I'm going to try to do justice to the progress that we've had since the Active Transportation Division was created in 2017, but really building on earlier work at WashDOT to emphasize multimodal transportation that works for everyone. Connectivity and safety and equity and environmental justice, to Jonathan's point earlier about how does safety show up, those all track together for active transportation. You cannot have one of those without having all of those, and that's really in our work. We don't always say analysis is progress, but it is important to have the numbers in front of us, as Jonathan presented, and then for us, two sets of analysis really looked at safety and equity in particular, the Active Transportation Plan in 2021, and the Vulnerable Road User Safety Assessment that was published in 23. Those tell us what we need to do to make progress, which is that we need to focus first on those locations where the most burdens were born from those past transportation decisions. The good news in progress is Move Ahead Washington, with both policy direction and investments, it's really been essential to being able to say that we're making progress. Those legislative actions linked these elements of connectivity and safety and equity and environmental justice. They gave WashDOT a Complete Streets Directive where we have funded projects, and I will say that more than once, where we have funded projects in a category like preservation, we can address the lack of active transportation connectivity, because that's usually why it's an incomplete street. That isn't there. Move Ahead also, with funding from the Climate Commitment Act, expanded our existing programs and added new ones so we can invest in local projects. They created the Sandy Williams Connecting Communities program, and that lets us focus in particular on current and former state routes. And the former state routes often still function and feel like a highway, but now they're a main street through a downtown and needs to change. We also have the first phase of what will become the biggest school-based bike ed program we've ever had at full build-out. It would be 90% of all elementary and middle school students getting bike education. So think about that, what that represents for a future generation of people who routinely bike for transportation. They funded a cycle highways plan, and this builds on a concept we had in the Active Transportation Plan around a statewide bikeways and trails concept. And if you think of it, the word highways is there to be analogous to the function of a highway between places, that if we have really good regional trail spines, then the local networks can plug into that. That sets us up to compete for federal dollars. We've already succeeded in some of that. It leverages the local efforts in trail building over the years. Best time to build a trail was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And we're going to put that together with e-bikes. When you have good facilities and people have an e-bike, that's a real game changer because they are willing to ride farther. It's easier. E-bikes overcome both distance and difficulty, and separated facilities makes it really comfortable. The legislature created a couple of programs for us, really as sort of a pilot size. We have an RFP out now for the vendor to run the e-bike voucher program. Lots of invisible work, and we've been learning from, I'm sorry to say, some failed launches in other states, so we've been trying to get it right before we bring it out the door. Pressing work to be done very quickly. The new Strategic Highway Safety Plan is coming out in November, Target Zero. It's grounded in the Safe System approach. We will be the first state in the country to add a sixth element in the Safe System. The traditional five are safer roads, speeds, vehicles, road users, and post-crash care. We are adding safer land use, and our agency doesn't make land use decisions. So it's really critical to have the local elected officials supporting the land use that brings people and what they need closer together. And that supports active transportation, connectivity, and safety. They'll need to include housing policy for that to advance equity. One more pin in equity and environmental justice. We've been using those criteria for a long time. The more recent publicity around how many Washingtonians are non-drivers really reinforces that. It's 25 to 30%, and that category is going to grow over time with an aging Washington. So as people age out of driving, if they drive today, how are they going to maintain their transportation freedom? Our priorities as an agency are safety, preservation, maintenance operations, fish passage, and ferries. That's all 5. We have complete streets in our processes in everything we do. I'll say it again, when we have funding for projects, we will incorporate complete streets. And what we want is a complete network that works as well going out the door to walk or roll as it does if you're going out the door with your car keys in your hand.
Thanks, Barb. Great background and progress made, and still the work to be done. So really appreciate your thoughts. Okay, certainly not last but not least, Casey James from the Seattle Department of Transportation, a strategic advisor who's involved in the Reconnect South Park project, and does have some slides. So I've got those. Casey, if you're on.
Hi, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting there. I'm here.
That's quite all right.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting us here today. I'm Casey James with the City of Seattle's Office of Planning and Community Development, actually not from SDOT, and I lead the city's efforts on the Reconnect South Park project. However, I'm actually currently on parental leave for the summer, so Pat Olson, who is also on the line, has stepped in to lead the project in my absence and can help to answer any questions that may come up. I greatly appreciated the conversation so far today and all the work the Commission is doing to develop these policy pillars. We're really grateful for this opportunity to contribute to this work. Next slide. I won't go into too much detail on the Reconnect South Park project, as we've had the privilege of discussing it with the Commission a few times previously. However, for those new to the work, Reconnect South Park is a community-centered initiative aimed at addressing the negative impacts of SR 99 on the South Park neighborhood of Seattle. Next slide. The highway cuts through South Park at a diagonal, causing significant challenges to community health, well-being, and local mobility. Since 2022, the city has been collaborating with the Reconnect South Park Community Coalition, with funding from the state legislature and additional support from the federal Reconnecting Communities program. Next slide. Our current focus is a in-depth technical exploration of potential futures for the highway, including options such as removal, boulevard conversion, tunneling, and mitigation. Our approach is to resource and center the community's visions, priorities, and goals throughout all aspects of the project. Next slide. Next, I'll discuss the connections I see between the Reconnect South Park project and the opportunities I see for the WTP update. However, if anyone's interested in learning more about the project, we're happy to answer any questions after, and you can also visit our project story map to learn more at any time. Next slide. The challenges that are faced by South Park due to SR 99 are emblematic of a broader pattern observed across the state and the nation. Historically, highways were often deliberately routed through neighborhoods of color, displacing residents, isolating communities, and reinforcing racial and economic divides. Next slide. For example, a comparison of Seattle's original highway system plan with its redlining map reveals that highway alignments often skirted around wealthier, whiter areas and cut through red and yellow line neighborhoods. Additionally, highway interchanges with their very large footprints were often planned to displace entire neighborhoods, particularly Black communities, as we saw in the Seattle Central District. These decisions have left lasting scars and continue to harm the mental and physical health, safety, and well-being of communities like South Park today. As we look to the future of Washington's transportation system, it's vital not only to acknowledge the harm that persists, but also to actively work to undo it. I've been really encouraged by the direction the state has been taking lately, with many of the things just mentioned: the complete streets mandate, increased investments in alternative transportation, increased climate commitments, and a focus on highway maintenance and safety improvements over continued expansions. These shifts represent really significant progress. However, I think we must really confront the legacy of a car-centric transportation system designed in ways that have gravely harmed communities, particularly those of color, and a system that we've continued to expand for the last six decades. The current update of the WTP offers a critical juncture where we can not only maintain and improve the system we have, but also develop a blueprint for a transportation system of the future, one that can repair past harms, promote more sustainable options, and allow all communities to thrive. In some places like South Park, that may require us to really fundamentally rethink our current infrastructure. Next slide. DOTs and planning agencies like my own were responsible for a lot of the harmful decisions that shaped the original highway planning. While we've made a lot of progress since then, true cultural change takes time, and the transformative solutions we seek can't always originate from within our institutions. Through Reconnect South Park, we've dedicated substantial resources to uplifting community expertise because those most directly impacted by past planning mistakes are pretty uniquely positioned to envision and drive the solutions we need moving forward. Conventionally, community engagement has tended to be a little more superficial, with residents expected to volunteer their insights without meaningful power or compensation. But transportation systems are very deeply interconnected with the fabric of the communities they serve. So our planning efforts should draw from community expertise to reflect that complexity. The state has made a lot of progress of recognizing the importance of equity and community involvement in transportation planning. By building off that foundation and fully resourcing and centering community expertise, providing not just a platform for feedback, but the financial and technical support necessary for community-led initiatives, we can ensure that transportation systems genuinely reflect the needs and aspirations of the communities they serve. I hope to see the WTP continue to build off the state's progress by encouraging deeper, more collaborative partnerships that empower communities to lead the way in shaping their futures. In conclusion, I'm hopeful that the WTP will be an opportunity to build a more just and equitable future. While I know there's a lot of work still to be done, I trust that by acknowledging past harms, embracing community expertise, and making thoughtful, forward-looking decisions, we can start to create a transportation system that not only meets today's needs, but also begins to heal the divisions of the past. Thanks again for your time and for the opportunity to share our work. We truly appreciate your interest and support.
Thank you, Casey. My apologies for misrepresenting your department. Really insightful presentation, and just really excited about the work that's happening down in South Park. And definitely, would be good to kind of revisit some of these themes next week when we talk about equity as well. So I'll keep them front and center when we have that conversation. So thank you so much to the three of you for sharing your thoughts. Casey, if you wouldn't mind putting the story map link in the chat, that would be wonderful. So I wanted to just we have three questions that relate to those questions that I posed earlier about where we think Washington is making the most state. That we in Washington collectively are making the most progress with respect to connecting communities. We have a question on where the greatest work there's still to be done, and also what are the potential solutions. So we've heard from three folks in the field, but I'd love to hear from you all in your communities, in your worlds. Where do you think that we have made the most progress to date on connecting communities? So head on over to the Menti link. Again, if you're just joined us, you can click the link in the chat or go to menti.com and enter in the code 76907372, and that should bring you to the questions. So the HEAL Act, Climate Commitment Act for more funding. We have, doing well addressing short distance trips with bike lanes and routes to schools. Complete streets, multimodal safety. Funding for pedestrian overpasses for freeways. We have the intercity bus plan that's underway to connect some of those longer distance transit trips. So the Transportation Improvement Board connecting local communities to funding, especially in rural areas. complete streets, understanding equity and effects of past decisions. So these are great, kind of highlighting some of the work that's being done, both in terms of funding of projects, in terms of policy. Does anyone want to kind of come online and share any thoughts on what you put in here? If you have anything else to kind of add to your comments, or any reactions to what you're seeing here? Yes, Larry. I'll go to Larry and then Nicholas.
Hi, all. I hope you can hear me okay. I was kind of, I think, summing up several things, Complete Streets, HEAL Act, things like that by, I put in changing codes, plans, and standards. Because if you want to avoid individual firefights over individual locations and projects, what you do is you concentrate on changing codes, plans, and standards. And I want to encourage any advocates to use that as a North Star, with the other one being the three most important rules in advocacy are get the money, get the money, get the money. Thanks.
And Larry, just to kind of probe on that, if you don't mind. So do you think that there's been a lot of progress made with this, or is, how much work is there still to be done? And how can the WTP sort of help advance that?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing, if you took me back in time, or if you visited me back in time, you said, 10 years ago, maybe even less, that, WashDOT would be saying to locals, I'm sorry, when we do a project, we include all modes. I would have said, I don't know what you're on. There's a complete culture shift, and that's awesome. I really appreciate that, and that's really making a difference. And it is starting to help get through some of the thicker skulls, I think, in local governments. And signaling there's a real policy shift towards equity and connecting communities. There's obviously, there's like the broad policy, right? But then there's also obviously ways in which we need to kind of like feel out and work out how it plays out on the ground. And so, for instance, I'm in South Tacoma, where literally a block and a half from my house is SR7, also known as Pacific Avenue. And so, that being a WashDOT facility, they have a complete streets policy. The local government has an adopted plan with that aligns bike facilities on a nearby parallel street. And so we have to kind of like figure out within this context, within this overall broad policy orientation of complete streets, is there a way, how do we marry that into local policies and plans in a way that works for everyone, and that is rational and makes sense? There's sort of hints in the level of traffic stress sort of analysis that's in the active transportation plan that maybe shows there's potential room to, if not on the state-owned facility, to make improvements, maybe in the nearby parallel routes. So there, I think that this just goes to show that it's like it's an ongoing iterative process of how we adopt policies and then kind of like smooth it over. Like you're making a patch on a wall, right? There's this hole in the wall of mobility, and you put this like big blop of spackle or something, but you got to kind of smooth it out and feather it out and kind of make things work in a rational way with the local governments. And it will be, frankly, just the iterative process of updating plans like this, but also the conversations that happen between, and literally the processes that happen that include these conversations with the regional and local partners about to kind of highlight these things and think about, are there ways in which we can resolve these issues of our complete streets policy and your local plan, let's say, with the Pacific example, or adjacency, funding adjacent improvements where, to address level of traffic stress if it's incredibly difficult to do so on a state facility. So, really just having the iterative processes and the conversations that involve them, and even between, and sharing ideas and breaking down silos between land use and mobility regulatory bodies at local and state and regional levels. I mean, I put in the chat, and I meant it as a big pat on the back, at a state, not an attaboy, but an at a state, about including land use in Vision Zero. You cannot talk about traffic safety and mobility, safety, justice, and access without talking about land use. Land use locks in mobility patterns, period. And so it has to really be, in there. So to the degree that the plan can and does help break down those barriers, that's a way to help address these things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. Yes, great food for thought for our future questions as well. So Nicholas, and then we can move on to others or the next question. Go ahead, Nicholas.
Yeah, hi there. I just wanted to highlight that there is, in fact, a intercity bus study underway. The Washington State Department of Transportation currently operates 4 lines connecting rural communities with urban centers. And anyone that's interested in that, the point of contact at the Washington State Department of Transportation, her name is Stoker. And the email there is Nina, Nina .Stoker, STOCKER at WSDOT.law.gov. In case anyone has any further questions about that, they can reach out to her. Before the study that's currently underway will be wrapped up here this fall and presented to the legislature in December. So if you have any thoughts or comments that you want to incorporate into that plan, you might want to get a hold of them fairly soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicholas. Yes, and I believe that I'll drop a link to that, but I think they're calling it kind of a connecting communities plan. So it's sort of interesting that term, again, means a lot of different things depending on the context. So let's move on to the next question, which is getting into where are the most biggest gaps or where do we need to do the most work? So we've talked about some of the progress being made in terms of policy, in terms of funding, but what are the biggest challenges that remain? So go ahead and go back to the Menti poll, and I will pull up the live version of it as well. Excuse me. So the first comment is, hard to travel around the state if you prefer not to drive or can't drive. Again, this is sort of the bigger connecting communities, connecting population centers or rural and suburban communities. Safety, equal access for all, urban and rural. So continued consistent funding. So we had the big package, but kind of long-term, sustainable, consistent funding for these types of projects. So here's maybe it's a challenge or an opportunity. Emphasis on quick build projects that connect miles of protected infrastructure. So curious if whoever put that in wants to share more about that, if they're promoting the sort of quick build approach, because it can be an easy way to sort of close some of those net gaps and kind of test out a different facility.
Yeah, thanks, John. That was me. My name's Kate Favre. I'm a senior planner with WashDOT's Olympic region. I put that in there just because I've had some experience with projects that we have a state project, we have a local project. After the two are built, maybe within the same 5 to 10 years of each other, you look at it kind of from a 30,000 viewpoint, and there's a very maybe cost-efficient quick build project that was missed between the two that could have connected the two in a very efficient way, whether that's WashDOT, maybe adding more right-of-way, the locality, adding more right-of-way, whatever it is. Many times I've seen where there's those missed connections, kind of stemming just from poor communication between the two entities. So some missed opportunities there for sure.
Great. Yeah, I think that speaks to a couple issues around just collaboration and sort of connect, cross jurisdictions, cross agency, and then also just quick build as a concept of a way to, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Try out something, create the connection, and then see if it works, and then make it permanent or make it more substantial over time.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of great stuff in here. Yeah, I see Nicholas is raising his hand. So anyone else, please raise your hand if you have a comment on what you put in here, what you're seeing in the poll. Go ahead, Nicholas.
Yeah, hello again. A couple of comments on that. I wrote down that some rural areas cannot support level 3 chargers, which could lose out on travelers' money. I live over by La Crosse, Washington, which sits along Highway 26 and is a major east-west corridor for Washington State University students traveling to Pullman. Now, we looked into getting level 3 charging to try and draw them into town. We're only just 2 miles off of the highway, which bypassed town sometime back in the 70s. But trying to get people to stop and spend money at our store is already challenging enough with the gas. And now we've found that we cannot get a level 3 charger. The best we can do, we are going level 2, but there really isn't any EV infrastructure along Highway 26. Now they are looking at putting a level 3 in Othello, which will help people along Highway 26. But both myself, through my research, just looking at online comments, and Avista, our local utility, have found that some people are actually driving an extra 75 miles while using an EV. So they go all the way up to Spokane, then come down to Pullman, which is bypassing us. So there's going to be some challenges as we implement the EVs across the state. As these EV chargers like the one in Othello come online and we come online, it'd be good to make sure that travelers are aware of this, that they don't have to bypass us entirely, that they can still continue to travel along Highway 26. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not just driving, biking, walking, transit. It's also, as we transition to a lot more electric vehicles or connected autonomous vehicles, what does that mean in terms of accessibility, and what kind of transportation infrastructure do we need to support that? Some of the other themes I'm seeing in here are around public acceptance. So, messaging around is a challenge around slower speeds, around mode shift, educating youth. I'm seeing a lot on funding. I'm seeing a lot on, connectivity. Here's sort of a passenger rail connectivity. Other themes that you're seeing here, anyone else want to share their thoughts on what they're seeing in the poll or what you put in here?
John, I see safety several times highlighted. I wonder if anybody has a comment on their thoughts related to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Nicholas?
Hi there. Hello again. As far as safety goes, trying to get more people onto these buses, and we are looking at getting some more connections to Washington State University, would help reduce. At the same time, while I'm trying to get more people to come to town off of Highway 26, it'd be nice if we can put them on buses, and so that we can reduce the number of cars. Because when it comes time to move in or move out of Washington State University, that little Highway 26 is way over capacity. So if we can get a few of these people into buses as they're traveling home and back and forth for the weekend and so on and so forth, that would be really helpful. And basically trying to get more people out of their cars into public transportation, I feel will help increase safety by reducing the number of cars out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Larry?
Regarding safety, I mean, it is entirely a policy choice of our society to allow motorized vehicles to exceed speed limits, period. That could change, and that technology exists already. But it's going to take brains and spines that are connected at local, regional, state, and federal levels to address that. I would be very proud if Washington State was a leader in that conversation. I'm not just talking about, driver assistance where your car is saying, "Oh, would you please consider not going 100 miles an hour down the street?" To me, we are doing everything possible to avoid dealing with the issue that we allow drivers to go down the street, road, highway, well in excess of the speed limit. And there is absolutely no rationale other than emergency services for any driver of a vehicle to do that, period. That's a policy decision. And it's not an easy one because we have so centered cars. They are a holy cow, not unlike firearms in our society. And they are as capable of death and destruction as some forms of firearms. And yet regulation is a difficult but needed policy decision. Thanks.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to the safety issue. From what I've seen on safety issues, there's really not a strong causality that's been identified. But one of the things that we should take into consider is the fact that we have a large number of heavy and powerful SUVs and pickup trucks that are on the roads today. And for the most part, we do nothing to disincentivize or to regulate those particular pickup trucks, especially with regards to sightlines for pedestrians. And so that's something which maybe is outside of what traditionally has been done in the transportation plan, but certainly looking at trying to develop some standards and some guidelines. I'm concerned that there's nothing in our EV and transportation or electrification that identifies this as an issue. We really are incentivizing large EVs over 5,000 pounds, which have these issues of being a hazard for pedestrians and a hazard for other vehicles which are lighter weight.
Thanks, Jeffrey. There's a lot of chatter in the chat, so take a look at that if you're not if you haven't seen it. One question that was raised by Nicole: can you speak to best practices incorporating good policy for developments to include ride sharing systems? So I'm assuming this is at the local land use, requiring developers to include ride sharing systems in development. So if there's folks on here who are with a city and have experience with kind of those kind of TDM or developer requirements and want to share some of their best practices, please come online or throw it in the chat. Is there anything else in the chat that folks have put in there that they want to share with the group? Okay, so let's move on to the last question, which is certainly related, but moving from gaps and challenges to solutions. Again, we've started to talk about some of these already. So really thinking about the WTP, given this is, it's a policy plan that can make recommendations or recommended strategies. What are those priorities? What are the new or refined strategies that we should really emphasize in the Washington Transportation Plan? I think we're still, or at least I'm still stuck on the last question. Can we advance to the next question? There we go. Okay, we've got a few comments in. Please keep them coming. This is where we really need all your collective knowledge about, all those potential solutions or strategies out there that could help, really advance safety, advance connectivity, advance accessibility on the system in Washington. So we got no highway expansion without mitigation. Minnesota has a model. California also has some mitigation requirements as well. Funding for the quick build that we talked about on the last question. Build Highway 230. Pairing regional transit planning with local land use planning. Improve coordination among all transportation agencies. Reduce permitting of projects intended to mitigate existing harms. So I think this came up in our sustainable funding or long-term funding conversation, that it's not just about, more funding. It's also about, making it easier for projects to get built. And this one's really focused on projects that provide that benefit, that mitigating harm, restoring historical connectivity. So reducing the permitting for those types of projects. A total network analysis of kind of multimodal active transportation, door-to-door transit. Okay, keep them coming. Anyone want to come off mute and share your thoughts on what you're seeing here, what you put into the Menti poll? See, I lost my video for a second. Let me pull up my participant window. Just come offline. Let me see. Yes, Barb.
Yeah, as the one from the engineering agency, I actually want to speak to the vehicle size and driving skills point that's come up several times, because in Target Zero, that is spoken to. The state can't regulate vehicle design, but we can regulate driver's license standards. We can change driver's ed and training. We could institute retests at certain points in your life cycle as a driver. And Target Zero has several points about that. Though most of those are things that would require legislative action. Some of them, I think it would be interesting to look at what local ordinances might be done. For fleet owners, do you require all of your drivers who are going to check out a state vehicle or a local agency vehicle to go through enhanced driver training, like the League of American Bicyclists has a bicycle-friendly drivers training? Do you hold your own employees to a higher standard if they're going to use your fleet vehicle? Do you say you want speed limiters installed on fleet vehicles? There are actions that could be taken, and then you'd have a whole fleet of sort of pace cars on the road. It would be a very different driving environment. So there's food for thought in Target Zero. It's done with public comment, but worth looking at when the final version comes out.
Barb, can I ask you while you're still unmuted, and I haven't looked at Target Zero in detail, is there any thought about sort of more enforcement or more technological enforcement of speed limits? Something Larry was mentioning about just, is there any chatter about that, or any political will to talk about, technology as a solution for reducing speed over or excessive speeding?
Yeah, it's important to start by saying that Target Zero directly addresses the equity issues around enforcement and the importance of making sure we don't have disparities in enforcement. And then when you go back and look at the kinds of roads we built in those redlined communities that were spoken to, that's where the wide, fast, busy road is. That's where the design itself makes it pretty easy to go faster than the posted speed. So you have to do an equity layer of analysis to understand how you might use automated safety cameras. And that all is laid out in Target Zero. There were some legislative changes to expand the opportunity for local agencies to put in more safety cameras with some equity analysis requirements. And so it is a tool, it's proven effective. One of the things that was also added was the potential of having citizen follow-up on a safety camera ticket rather than law enforcement, and then you can focus your law enforcement resources on the things that they really are more prepared to handle. And so I think there's some interesting discussion in there. It could probably be carried on at the local level to see what more might work within a community. And there is, I don't have the numbers in my head, but there was also a statewide survey that the Traffic Safety Commission did, asking people which things are priorities to them for safety, and enforcement comes up in that, and DUI and speeding were top priorities.
Thanks, Barb. Yeah, Bernie, you have your hand raised.
I think Nicholas was raising his hand literally. So if he wants to go first, go ahead.
Sorry, I was trying to find my video screen. It got hidden behind some other window, so I didn't see the physical hand. Go ahead, Nicholas.
Yes, sorry about that. I'm still not quite sure on my cell phone how to access that virtual hand feature. A couple of comments. I had mentioned Highway 230, which was actually authorized by the legislature in the 1940s, but never funded. Now, that would connect Interstate 90 from Ritzville over to Highway 23 over by Ewan into the St. John area, which would actually offer a nice alternative to Highway 26 for students traveling and people traveling to Washington State University, and also provide better interconnectivity for the rural communities of people in St. John trying to reach Ritzville without having to drive all the way north to Sprague first and then coming back down. So that'd be kind of fun to have that going. Now, as a discussion about some of the technology to change driver behavior. Currently, I do have some concerns in evacuation scenarios. Now, currently, there already is a breathalyzer mandate for new cars and trucks coming out. And I'm concerned with that existing mandate that in the event of a sudden wildfire, sudden field fire, and you need to get out now, you had one beer, well, you're toast, you're crispy. Our firefighters are actually volunteers, and they're not just sitting there at the fire station just waiting to go to a call. So they might need to exceed the speed limit in order to get to their fire truck in order to save these lives. So if you're trying to speed limit them at 30 miles an hour, well, good luck there. So, I mean, I just want people to think about evacuations, emergencies, other things before they get too excited about all these technology things, which can save lives, but it could backfire. That's my comment there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, important to recognize that there's different contexts for these different solutions, and got to think of the unintended consequences along with the benefits. Bernie, did you still have a comment?
Yeah, I guess one of the things I've observed a lot is that a lot of the issues that lead to car dependency are driven by the focus, or we rely on, as municipalities, to rely on private developers for developing out our neighborhoods, and that tends to prioritize lower density housing developments and lower connectivity of streets. So it kind of creates like the funnel effect of all the traffic going onto a few major collectors or arterials, which makes our streets more vulnerable when those collectors break down. It makes it more difficult to navigate non-motorized. And I guess it comes back to like standards and the practices we use to develop out these neighborhoods, and that seems to be very slow to change at the local level. So I guess I don't know what my point is exactly, that except that maybe we need more support with changing those standards, making it more like, because we want more housing, obviously, and so we need those developers, the way it currently works. We need to work with them. But how can we as like municipalities be better equipped to ensure that they're not building like dead end streets that don't connect to anything, and I don't know. Does that make sense? Am I getting my point across? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense to me. Are there any other thoughts from the group about what Bernie shared, or these other items in the chat? Yes, Larry.
And for the record, I tried to prompt other people to speak.
I'm okay with the awkward silence. It's I appreciate that, Larry, but there's so much good comments in this poll, so we've collected your thoughts. I'm not going to read everything out to you all right now, so really
I just
appreciate
want to
everyone.
make space for other folks to participate. But that I'm seeing some comments about regulation to eliminate building of stroads, and I think that there's probably some other comments there, but at some point, and I put it in the chat because I had a little Menti hiccup. Wasn't on your side. It was totally my fault. I didn't realize the slide had changed because all the slides have the same background. So I thought I was still on the old slide and I skipped ahead and then I couldn't answer the question. But I'm starting to look suspiciously, if you will, at GMA requirements for concurrency, meaning the local governments are required to address congestion, if you will, and keep the roadway, I guess, concurrent with development, its capacity to prevent a failure of a level of service or a throughput of cars. I'm trying to de-jargonize here. Folks aren't familiar. But I also, that just goes hand in hand, though, with a very car-centric, like, single use sprawling land use type model which encourages car use, and then that leads to congestion, which leads to capacity increases, which makes roadways inhumane, impractical and distances impractical for walking or biking. The transit is then stuck in all the car traffic, and so what do? Well, you don't want to walk, bike, or take transit. So then you drive. And then, as I put in my comment, rinse and repeat. It winds up being a vicious cycle where we're chasing after capacity to save us, and which we know isn't the case. And I don't want to. I'm always reluctant to put a target on the back of GMA because every legislative session there are plenty of targets on the back of GMA that wind up, but I'm starting to think about that particular thing, concurrency requirements, as part of what has gotten us into the state that we are. Maybe it's an oversimplistic view, but certainly there's that marriage of land use and transportation planning and regulation that really needs to happen. And I think a lot of these policy and strategy suggestions are really, related to that in certain ways. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. I see Andy's hand is raised. I know that there are the sort of multimodal level of service guidelines, or as part of the new GMA requirements. So I think that there was some draft guidance from WashDOT out, but I'm wondering if there's an update on that guidance as well. So I'll go to Andy if you have thoughts on this or other topics.
That was just gonna be what I was going to say is that the people who are updating their comprehensive plans in this cycle and the following cycles, the new requirement is you have to address multimodal. What that looks like will vary by jurisdiction, and I know some of the more urban jurisdictions have taken kind of a full switch their LOS totally to multimodal. I know Shoreline's an example of that, but even in our city, it was a requirement that we adopt, some policy analysis towards multimodal. Although, how that actually people change policy into practice will vary at different places, but that is something the state did require in this newest cycle of updates.
And is there room for the WTP to kind of help on that topic? I know WashDOT, I think, is putting out guidance. How can the WTP further that for the benefit of local jurisdictions?
I would say from local jurisdictions standpoint, we're all kind of walking into what level of service standards mean with multimodal. Because looking at how everyone's kind of doing it for the first time, so we'll see how different things work. My concern is I want to be able to capture the impacts of new development. I don't want to just kind of ignore if we're letting new development come in and it's overwhelming our infrastructure. But at the same time, the traditional method of LOS intersection standards, that doesn't really work with transit, things like that. So some of the early stuff I've seen, I worry that they're just going to say, yeah, just even if we start failing intersections, ignore it because it's multimodal. Well, that only works if you're really seeing people switch transit modes. That may happen. I'm not saying it won't. It's just we'll have to wait and see how different policies fare. And I think it'll really vary by jurisdiction. I mean, it's obviously much different in a kind of more suburban setting than in a much more urban setting or a rural setting. We're all going to have different experiences with that. But I think we're going to be a lot of experimentation, a lot of different ideas. So if WTP could kind of pull together what we're hearing and actually look at outcomes of different policies. I mean, that's what I think is always helpful for jurisdictions. If I'm going to adopt something, if you can tell me what's worked and what hasn't, that's always great.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, Barb?
Yeah, the interesting part here is that Commerce holds the lead on the Growth Management Act overall. So guidance will come from them on GMA. And we interact with that a lot. I find myself thinking out loud about the term service and what it includes. Because as understood and implemented, it's been throughput at lights, as Andy just mentioned. But what if we had a multimodal level of safety service, a multimodal level of equity service? What do we mean by service for transportation? Who's being served? And if you pointed the way to, I don't have an answer for that, if you pointed the way to MMLOS, that the S addresses multiple things, not just traffic flow. And I'll tell you now, we don't even have the data to tell you my wait time as a pedestrian or my wait time as a bicyclist. So, so there's a lot there. So I don't know what you would do, but pointing to the need to think about that could be really interesting.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Okay, we have a lot to digest here, so I really appreciate everyone's comments in the chat, everyone's comments in the Mentimeter poll. I'm going to let you out a few minutes early, so we have one final poll question that you can kind of we'll keep it open for a few more minutes if you want to stay on, add some more thoughts to this. Is there anything else you want to share with us about the WTP or connecting communities that you didn't get a chance to? Please put it into the final poll question. And again, we'll leave that open for the next 15, 20 minutes. With that, I'd like to, number one, talk about next steps. We have one more topic focus workshop next week on equity and transportation. As I mentioned, we're going to be distilling the feedback that we hear from all these meetings as well as our previous meetings, and focus on developing new and refined strategies for the Washington Transportation Plan. We'll vet those with state agencies as well as the legislature, and then come back to you all in early 2025 with some recommended strategies to react to. So I really want to thank everyone so much for joining us today, for providing all the written and verbal comments. Anything else, Paula, you want to, and especially thank you to the guest speakers. You want to close out with anything, Paula?
I just want to thank you all again for this really important and stimulating discussion today. I feel like more ideas were brought forth than we could have ever developed. if you have questions, reach out to us. Feel free to email additional thoughts. You know, and hopefully what we come back to you all with, you'll join in a review of and take a look at and give us additional feedback. We're hoping we can bridge the gap between GMA and the state policy goals in transportation a bit more with this WTP version. So thanks again.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.